Everyone, welcome to Yoga for Health and Resilience. This 10-week series of 90-minute classes is offered through Yoga X, a special initiative in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences in the School of Medicine at Stanford University. This evidence-based protocol is designed by Dr. Christiane Brems, who is clinical faculty and the program director at Yoga X. My name is Gino Carvalho, and I'm the program manager, and it is my great pleasure and honor to practice with you on these Saturdays. So today, like many of our previous sessions, we'll be using a lot of our props and resources. It might be nice to have a wall towards the end for Shavasana, maybe a legs up the wall, a blanket and a bolster, a couple of blocks, and a strap will be really helpful today. And then you just take a moment to gather those things. Perhaps begin to consider a seat for our opening centering. Maybe it's a chair, maybe it's your couch. Maybe it's the floor on a block, seated, maybe inviting an upright position of the spine. Whatever position feels auspicious for you as we begin to settle into this present moment. In this place, wherever you are, and within this community. And as you begin to settle in all these places and all these aspects, consider an intentional position for your hands. Perhaps it's palms down to feel a sense of grounding, maybe on the thighs, or maybe it's palms facing upward, inviting perhaps a little bit of opening and openness. And as you take in your surroundings, perhaps considering an auspicious choice for the eyes, maybe lowering the gaze, perhaps just allowing the eyes to lower, the eyelids to lower halfway, or if you feel comfortable doing so, maybe turning the gaze inward by closing the eyes. Making all these choices as you check in, knowing that you can always make a change at any point. Perhaps inviting yourself to make that change in a mindful way. So as you settle into your seat, I invite you to check in with all your layers of experience. And in our 9th session, perhaps you have a certain way that you go about doing this. Maybe it's scanning from the outside in or from the inside out. Perhaps it's scanning from the top down or from the bottom up. Whatever method you have for checking in, taking a moment, noticing the mindful choice of how you go about that. And as you check in, I invite you to do so with a deep sense of care, with a deep sense of loving kindness. To check in with a sense of compassion. Perhaps checking in with a sense of peace. as you notice the experience of the physical self, the body, just noticing what's there, noticing if there's a sense of tension or rigidity or fatigue, maybe something that feels pleasant or unpleasant. Just meeting that with love and kindness and a deep sense of care. And bringing your awareness gently to the breath as you tune in to the experience of the vital self, the energy in the body, the breath, noticing the flow of the breath, perhaps noticing subtle qualities in the breath, perhaps even a sense of stillness within the cycle of the breath, and meeting that with a deep sense of compassion and care without any need to change it. And then gently just bringing your awareness to any mind states and meeting them exactly how they are in this moment. Perhaps there's a sense of heaviness or lethargy, maybe a sense of fluttering, or maybe a little hyperactivity. Or maybe a focus, whatever it is, checking in and meeting that with loving kindness and compassion. And as you check in with the body and the breath and the mind, meeting them exactly how they are in this moment, meeting them with a sense of peace, a deep sense of care, a sense of compassion and loving kindness. Just take a moment to acknowledge and know that this is coming from your wise self, this deep intuitive wisdom of the observer, rooted in our true nature, that embraces this constant potential for loving kindness, compassion, peace, harmony, equanimity. Connection. And from this place, I invite you to consider an intention for our time together from this wise self. Just notice if anything is coming up that you would like to acknowledge and invite as an intention for our time together on the mat today. And if nothing's coming up at this moment, perhaps just leaving a little space for something that could potentially arise as we continue. I invite you to perhaps bring your hands to heart center if that feels auspicious. Perhaps just bowing your head if that feels inviting. And with an inhale, inviting the intention in. And with your exhale, sending that intention out. And I invite you to lower your hands if they were raised, and open your eyes if they were closed. And welcome again, everyone, to session 9 of our 10 series. Wow. So as you know, this series is an expression of integrated holistic yoga designed to take us through all aspects of our integration and holism as individuals and collectively. Session 9 is dedicated to the eighth limb of yoga, and that is Samadhi, which is not really a practice. It's more of a spontaneous integration of all the practices that we have explored in our previous sessions. It's this experience of feeling nourished and connected to the greater community. There's a sense of reciprocity, a sense of deep, authentic union for ourselves and all of our layers of experience, and also for all of the ways that we interact with the greater web of life. It's a matter of feeling connected, feeling whole, feeling joy. So it's really all of that simultaneously and spontaneously. So it's a little bit difficult to deliberately create all of that at once. So if you have that experience today in our practice, that's amazing. And if not, then just know that that potential is always there, just like all of those aspects that we've kind of suggested in our opening centering. And so all of those aspects that we kind of talked about in the opening centering are frameworks that might be a really helpful way for us to be aware when this opportunity to experience samadhi, right, might arise for us. And those are the Brahma Viharas. And the Brahma Viharas are often referred to as mature emotions. Sometimes they're also called like the abodes of the heart, the abodes of the wise heart. I love these kinds of names that really evoke a sense of our true compassionate essence, right? You might have heard some of these in the opening centering. They are loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. They're also, I've heard them referred to as where mindfulness meets virtue, a virtue that guides us in that gap between stimulus and response that we explored when in our session on karma, right? What a great way for us to really, take that time in that gap to make an auspicious choice, right? How we can root into these practices, these frameworks that are innately part of how we can show up at any point in time and make an auspicious choice. And knowing that these are also fluctuations of the mind, right? So we had a session earlier where we talked about our fluctuations, and we talked about fluctuations, having a kind of a spectrum of how they show up, and that sometimes they are rooted in our kleshas, right? Our kleshas that are these tendencies, the predilections that we have that might be rooted in attachment, aversion, fear, confusion, right? Those fluctuations are a little different from the Brahma Viharas, which are rooted in our wise self, right? This guide that we have that allows us to have these same fluctuations at an experience that is more auspicious for us and hopefully leads us to acknowledge our innate connection and our union and the joy that comes from that experience. So we'll go through these Brahma Viharas, first starting that you can really kind of think of these frameworks in a couple different contexts, I would say. Sometimes there's one that comes out as being foundational. And traditionally, I believe one that gets pointed to as a foundational Brahma Vihara is loving kindness, the idea that you are always holding yourself and others in a constant positive regard. It's this goodwill in action, wanting others to thrive and not just enjoying a momentary a moment of comfort. And that kind of requires courage to act, right? Goodwill in action. There's a courage there sometimes, right? That it might be one of those times when loving kindness is telling someone they have lettuce in their teeth, right? It acts as a stabilizing force, right? That you are willing and walking through this world, moving with loving kindness, moving through the world with loving kindness. And it contributes to this foundation of peaceful stability. The next Brahma Vihara that I'll talk about is compassion. So compassion is opening our heart to suffering. And again, this is something that takes courage. It also takes I love how Chris has talked about this in the Yoga X training a lot. It's a fierce compassion. I've in the past made a mistake of thinking as of compassion almost like pity in a way. And it's not that. It is a compassion to act with urgency, honoring our collective wisdom that tells us that we can proactively prevent suffering, right? And it takes courage to open our heart and meet that suffering. It takes courage to act as well. So we will play a lot with opening our heart today in our practice and really embodying this mature emotion. The next one we'll talk about is altruistic joy. And altruistic joy is this feeling, appreciation, joy, and gratitude in our own personal experiences, but also being very open to experiencing joy and for the good of others, what happens that is prosperous and beneficial for others, which allows us to kind of transform these feelings of maybe jealousy or envy or pettiness and things like that. It can be considered kind of an antidote to that, right? If we are really authentically feeling this altruistic joy for other people, it's hard to simultaneously hold that envy and jealousy that might be there in some of our kleshas, right? There's a saying that, feeling joy for yourself is joy times one, right? And that feeling joy for everyone is joy times 8 billion or however many people there are on the planet that we can feel joy for, right? And the next Brahma Vihara that I'll talk about, this final one, is equanimity. And another one that might feel like a great foundational Brahma Vihara because it provides this stabilizing resilience, right? And if you think about equanimity and its kind of qualities of harmony and tranquility, there's an endurance there. There's this stability that it provides that we can, that really lends itself to this idea of resilience, which is so ingrained in this 10 series, right, for health and resilience. It's a steadiness of the heart, and it's an ability to stay present and harmonious, even in the face of uncertainty and challenges. So you can think of this as like staying on your boat, even when you're in rough waters, right? So maybe you're getting tossed by the waves, but you can still stay the course. So you can think of these frameworks in a way that makes the most sense for you. Which Brahma Vihara is one that you're grounding into, that provides that grounding so that you can perhaps move through the other ones and maybe even expand, right? Providing grounding, stabilizing, and expanding opportunities. So we will explore this mature emotional architecture within the self through our practice today. And we'll start by setting up our seat for our breathing practice. And we'll offer you a specific seat for the breathing practice today. And that is to lay supine on your spine with a bolster, perhaps underneath your sacrum. I'll demonstrate this one for you. So I've got a bolster here. Maybe you're using a rolled up blanket, a nice thick pillow, or maybe a couple pillows can do the trick. Something that provides elevation, but is also soft and allows you to kind of settle in with your pelvis slightly higher than your shoulders. I have a blanket in the back here just in case there is an opportunity for me to change the pitch of the skull so that I can accommodate the angle of my throat. so that it stays open. So just take a moment to find the position for your bolster that allows for your sacrum to settle in. And consider a nice wide footprint where you can allow the knees to rest inward. And from there, once you settle through the feet and the pelvis, check in with the throat and just notice if there is a specific position of a blanket and a specific height that allows the throat to feel open, but not extended, and definitely not closed or flexed with the chin too close towards the sternum. And that blanket could end up having some presence under the shoulders as well to achieve that in some type of angle, depending on our unique anatomy, right? Maybe taking your hands out to the sides like you would in Shavasana. And as you take a moment to settle up your seat, you could decide at any time that this seat is not serving you and perhaps decide to make a change. Just inviting you to do so very mindfully with a deep sense of compassion and care and loving kindness and peace. And begin to invite a sense of grounding in the body. Maybe just feeling the pelvis on the bolster, feeling the shoulders on the floor, feeling the arms making contact with the floor, feeling the feet grounded. Invite a sense of grounding in the entire physical experience and release yourself into whatever shape you have chosen for this moment. And as you release the physical body grounding down, gently bring your awareness to the breath and invite a sense of curiosity. Invite a sense of curiosity to the qualities of the breath, noticing the journey of the inhale and exhale without any need to change it. Simply meet the experience of the vital self with compassion, and maybe a sense of harmony. Accepting the inhale and the exhale exactly as it is in this moment. See if you can notice all four parts of the breath cycle. Notice the inhale, the pause, the exhale, and the pause. Perhaps noticing how these two moments of pause offer that sense of peace, that sense of stillness, even if it's just for a very brief moment. Notice the inhale and a sense of expansion, a sense of spaciousness. Transitioning into the stillness and the pause at the top. Notice the exhale and the moment of letting go that transitions into stillness, peace, quietude. Invite the breath to stay subtle. Invite the breath to stay soft and smooth. Allow the natural harmony of this breath cycle to unfold gently, lovingly, with compassion, and maybe even a sense of joy. And as you notice the four parts of the breath in this breath cycle, perhaps inviting a little bit of a swallow at the top of the inhale before the exhale. This little bit of a mechanism that's maybe even a softness in the swallow as you inhale and transition into that pause, just that little bit at the top before letting go and inviting the pause at the bottom. Staying soft and subtle. And tending to the breath with a deep sense of compassion and loving kindness. Continue with this breath cycle for another 5 rounds of breath, or perhaps a little longer, depending on how long your unique cycle is. Knowing you can always stop that swallowing invitation or change to try it at any point, doing so mindfully. Inviting a sense of loving kindness. Inviting a sense of equanimity. Rooted in the awareness of our whole community, cultivating compassion together as a collective in this moment. Just noticing that connection as well. You can choose to continue with the swallow for the next 3 rounds of breath, or perhaps beginning to return to a natural, normal 4-part breath, whatever feels most auspicious for you for the next 3 rounds. And at the end of that 3rd round, beginning to plan your journey from wherever you are, perhaps in that supine position, planning a journey to an upright seat. When you're ready to do so, mindfully making your way to that seat. Once you've made your way to your seat, just taking a moment to ground once again, check in, maybe taking a moment to notice any effect of your breathing practice, perhaps even reconnecting to the intention you set, or maybe noticing if there's a new intention that has arose since we've started, maybe something that's rooted in loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, or equanimity. And as you're ready, we will transition to a tabletop shape. So go ahead and clear off your mat if you still have any props there. And we will perhaps invite a blanket in tabletop to soften the floor if that feels nice under the knees. Perhaps a wedge underneath the hands if that will feel nice for the wrists. You can always roll up a small blanket to elevate the palms, or you could perhaps maybe even just walk your hands forward slightly if that creates a little bit more auspicious angle, a little more obtuse angle. But otherwise, beginning to find your tabletop shape. Maybe the wrists beneath the shoulders and the knees beneath the hips. Wherever you are, take a moment to ground in that tabletop shape. Maybe grounding in equanimity, grounding in compassion. And take a moment to just notice the movement of the breath here. Noticing the stillness and movement and the movement and stillness. And from that dance, perhaps starting to invite just a subtle movement of the rounding and the arching that is cat-cow. Allowing that to just grow from a subtle place with loving kindness. Notice if there is a sight line that is locked in, and if it's something that is changing the way that your head and neck relate to the rest of the spine in tabletop. Notice if closing the eyes or just freeing the sight line might help to free the cervical spine to dance with the rest of the spinal column. And just notice in this arched position, this invitation to open the heart, perhaps even just staying in the open heart for a breath cycle or two. And once you've checked in with that, maybe inviting just a little bit more movement. Now for this, you could possibly invite your knees to be slightly wider, and that blanket may become more may serve you even more when you come into a wider knee print, because you'll have a different point of contact with the floor. But perhaps starting to move the hips back even further. It's almost reaching into child's pose. For everyone, it'll be a little different. And then this forward shape, inviting the heart to open. And just noticing if there's an auspicious breath that matches this movement. Perhaps it's bringing in the inhale, breathing in compassion, breathing into that open heart space. Maybe coming back with loving kindness and rounding the back. And as you move between the two shapes, perhaps just inviting a sense of harmony, tranquility, equanimity, and peace. Maybe even just noticing those little pauses in the breath cycle as you check in with movement and breath. You could possibly choose to continue the swallowing, or maybe that's a little distracting. Maybe that's a little dysregulating. Making the choice that's most auspicious for you. And after you've completed your next forward and back cycle. Come back to a tabletop shape that represents that stability of 4 corners. So maybe just bringing that wide knee print back to something that's more hips distance apart. And then gently reach back through, I'll reach through the left leg because it's an easier viewpoint for you right now. And as we extend the left knee, perhaps inviting the left heel to roll down, and then inviting a little bit of this rotation to play out, pressing down through the right and opening up the heart, maybe even extending the left arm up. And inviting yourself to perhaps have a little bit of movement in there, playing with that rotation. You can come all the way through a pelvis that allows the left hip point to point down, and then maybe invites the left hip point to open up as the heart opens up, coming into this side space. Just notice if there's a range of motion that is most auspicious, right? If we get too far, too opened up there, if that maybe takes us out of our effort to cultivate loving kindness and compassion. Perhaps taking one more of these, using that rotation, inviting that openness, and staying in this supported side plank shape. And then maybe inviting a little bit of this side bending emphasis. Maybe it's just as simple as the hand reaching over. Maybe the hand can come behind the head if that feels a little better. Just invite a little bit of breath through the left side body if you're on this side. Notice if you would like to play with any movement there. Perhaps there's an inhale and an exhale that works for this range of motion. There's a lot of different forces at play here, so you could end up making a different choice and playing and experimenting. Once you've experimented a couple times with that side bend, perhaps coming back to this side plank and inviting a sense of equanimity so that the heart is open, but we're not collapsed into a back bend that is bringing any tension into the body. Perhaps that means having a little bit of engagement underneath the ribs and feeling that challenge of lateral orientation, which is a long base of support, but not a very wide one, right? So you have that challenge to steady your equilibrium with equanimity. And when you're ready, perhaps returning to the tabletop shape. I'll switch sides so that I can still see you. I like seeing you. And when you're ready, perhaps changing to the other leg, the right leg coming back, right knee straightening, and invite that rotation, knowing that it might play out very differently on this side. So having loving kindness and compassion as we explore with curiosity the difference from one side to the other, and allowing for all of these movements to orchestrate something that feels like it is providing that sense of peace. So the ankle will turn, the hip will turn, the shoulder will turn. The head is also rotating, and that intentional placement of your sight line sometimes has a lot to do with where your head faces, which is how your cervical spine reacts in these shapes. And you'll notice very quickly if you're playing with the balance, if you close your eyes, you have a lot more of a challenge with the balance. After you've played with the rotation, once again on this side, perhaps inviting that little bit of side bending. It's a bit of a subtle move, but you can feel how pressing down through the left hand and reaching up through the right arm might add a little bit more of a straight line through the column. And then as you allow for the right arm to weigh down the lever on the top side of the shoulder, on the top side of the thoracic, there's a side bending that occurs here. This might have to move nice and slow. Sometimes finding loving kindness really does mean to move slowly. The opposite of moving fast and breaking stuff.
Amen, brother.
And as you balance your movements out from side to side, come back to tabletop. And maybe notice if this would be a good time for you to take a break from tabletop if you've been on your wrists for a while. If you'd like to shake the wrists out or perhaps offer them a little different engagement. Perhaps it's a matter of pressing the back of the wrist down very gently with loving kindness, with peace. It can be something nice about giving them just a little bit of space, a little bit of spaciousness with a little bit of stretch in the wrist. And as you're ready to come back to tabletop, let's grab a block. I have a nice foam block that I'll choose rather than a cork block for this, if you get that option. We'll take a moment to find a grounding in your hands and your shoulders. And then we're going to place this block right at the knee crease on the back end, right? So that flexed knee position can squeeze the block. And then we'll invite that engagement as we lift the left leg. So again, I started with the left side so you can see me. And invite that elevation and work on that dorsiflexion at the foot. So you can see my foot is flat instead of being pointed up. So we'll reach the heel high and the toes down towards the shin. And then engaging with the block. And then perhaps invite the heart forward a little bit. And notice if this heart opening shape, inviting the chest forward, inviting the knee up, and also taking care to not let the ribs fall out, not let the core fall out. Notice if this shape invites a sense of compassion and equanimity. Notice if you want to take a little break with that. There's a lot of engagement going on. See if that left hip is hiking up and out of shape. Maybe just lowering the knee down is enough. Can be a little bit of a whack-a-mole. As we lift through one thing, another thing pops out. And as we lift through another thing pops out. So taking inventory and taking care, bringing that deep sense of care as you take inventory. And then taking a moment to maybe release that leg. If you warmed up your hamstring a lot, you could definitely straighten that knee and maybe invite a little bit of extension in the knee before we switch over to the other side. So taking the block to the knee crease, grounding through the arms and a nice, strong, wide base beneath the shoulders, or maybe slightly out in front, maybe on a wedge. And then gently coming into this shape, knowing it's going to feel a lot different from the other side. And just notice that the toe automatically goes into plantar flexion and is reaching for the back of your head. Think about maybe adding that dorsiflexion and inviting the right hip to be around the same height as the left. Maybe feeling how that stability and that kind of balance might help guide some other orientation through the pelvis and the lumbar that allows for us to eventually be able to open the heart in the front, right? So if it's kind of turned around, and that might be less enduring, that might be less of a foundation of resilience, and takes a little bit of time and a little bit of breath and very present intentional curiosity to let that unfold. All right, so we had a nice duration of time to imprint that shape. And take a moment now to perhaps extend that leg again. If you'd like to go to child's pose, that's an option. Or perhaps taking the hands in front by about half or 3/4 of a handprint and flipping the toes and beginning to cultivate that strength in the center, in our core, in our center of being, to start to press into the floor and lift the knees, and maybe inviting the hips up and back into a down dog shape. Beginning to stretch out through the back of the body, the back of the legs, pressing into the floor, looking for a balance between the upper body and lower body in effort, in shape. Maybe it'll feel nice to allow for the calves to have a little bit of breath with a knee bend. Sometimes I like to roll the tops of my toes with that. And it's just one of those ways for me, if I roll the toes, talk about moving slow, right? Moving slowly with loving kindness and noticing all those reverberations as they play out through the body, through all of our layers of experience, not just our physical body, but the energy level, the energy experience, and our mind state. And as you're ready, I invite you to consider reaching the right leg up, maybe embracing this three-legged dog. And slowly we'll bring that leg forward, maybe taking that slow, deliberate, careful. Kind doesn't always mean gentle. It's fierce as well, right? As we bring that leg forward. So a lot of different ways to get that leg forward. You can always just step it forward. And when you're ready, coming into our footprint for Anjaneyasana like last week. So you might enjoy having a little bit of a pad underneath the left knee for this. Take a moment to find your stability. So once again, if it's really tight, if your right foot is right in front of your left knee, that will be a great lateral challenge. And if it's a little bit wider, like hips distance apart, it might provide a more auspicious base, a foundation, maybe a foundation of compassion that provides a little bit of stability to move with loving kindness and equanimity. So as we find that base in the legs and we find the stability in the pelvis, I invite you to consider a placement for the arms. So maybe there will be an opportunity to extend and reach out, and then maybe even come back into a bit of a cactus and notice the heart open. Notice how your shoulder blades react to this. So as the arms come forward, notice the shoulder blades separate. And then as your arms come back, notice the shoulder blades coming together. And then maybe even adding a little bit of elevation with that. And coming back. And maybe even inviting the arms to come all the way up if that feels auspicious for you. You can always look for that even place. As we're playing with our base, the femurs coming into, both femurs want to come into the pelvis to provide that stable foundation. Same thing with the shoulders. We can extend, we can expand, but there's still a reach back to ground. So from wherever you are, just taking a moment to find that shape, find that expression, perhaps grounding, finding your stability, and expanding into openness. And then gently returning to a down dog shape, or maybe it's a tabletop shape. Maybe coming to the three-legged dog if that feels intuitive, to come back the way that you came in. And just for a moment, take a breath and notice, take a couple breaths to notice the effect of that practice on one side. And in your own time, as you're ready, knowing there's different side, different story, slowly make your way to the footprint for Anjaneyasana.
So maybe just letting that foot find its way there, or maybe hovering for a moment, inviting a little bit of that fierce compassion as we begin to ground down. Maybe feeling the base in the back leg with the top of the foot, adding a little bit more base with the rudder. The femurs coming into the pelvis, both of the front femur and the back femur, to provide stability in the center. And then maybe inviting a little bit of this investigation of where the humerus best aligns with the scapula, where the scapula sets on the torso in a way that provides a nice strong base, an invitation to engage and be fierce in our center with stability, and then maybe be open and expansive into joy. Once again, gently making your way out of this shape, same way you came in, or just going straight to tabletop or child's pose. We're going to repeat this move one more time with a little variation, or you can take the same variation that you just explored, or any of the other options that we invited the last time around. But perhaps reaching up and back for that three-legged dog shape, expanding into joy, and then coming into a fierce compassion and grounding that front leg. You can choose to ground the back knee and provide more stability, or maybe this time there's an imprint that's there that allows for that back knee to stay up, maybe grounding down, finding that grounding in compassion, finding stability in loving kindness, moving with equanimity, and expanding into altruistic joy. Just allowing for this shape to unfold however it makes sense for you. You could even invite a little different arm position. So we don't need to lock anything out here, but if it's available to you, you could take a strap, you could take a towel, you could take a TheraBand behind you, or interlace the fingers. And then maybe invite the heart to open forward. Just notice if you hyperextend or lock out the elbows, just like you wouldn't do that with the legs down below in your foundation. Maybe continuing to tend to all this orchestra of engagement with deep sense of care and compassion. And as you're ready, just gently making your way down and back through whatever way makes sense for you. Tabletop, down dog, beginning to make your way through the other side. Perhaps reaching up and expanding, finding something fierce, grounding. Maybe this side is very different from the other side. Taking care and grounding in compassion. Stabilizing with equanimity to move with loving kindness and expand with altruistic joy. Maybe your architecture is slightly different within the Brahma Viharas. It's certainly going to be different within your physical body and anatomy. Inviting that stability through the femurs, inviting the stability in the shoulder girdle as well. And if you played with a little different arm variation, maybe playing with that on this side as well. And as you're ready, just gently making your way back. And perhaps holding that downward dog, if that feels auspicious, or maybe a child's pose can feel really nice here. Perhaps a little bit of a tabletop. Maybe there's a really mindful cat-cow or any other little movements that might feel auspicious, as you just take a pause to notice the results of that practice before transitioning, maybe coming back to your intention for a moment. At the end of your next breath cycle, start to consider a transition forward from wherever you are, if it was child's pose or tabletop or down dog, and make your way into either a kneeling or a high plank if you'd like. And coming into this position towards the front of the mat, invite once again a very slow, loving, kind descent with compassion, landing with peace. And if that felt good, you might want to do it again. You can stay where you are. You could drop the knees down if they were up the first time. But maybe just inviting a very slow, loving, kind, descent until grounding. And once you make your way all the way down, perhaps just taking a moment to rest the head. Forehead can be down on the backs of the hands, or maybe turning the head to one side feels particularly auspicious right now. Once you feel grounded, maybe pointing the feet or going to the plantar flexion so that you can press the tops of the feet into the floor. Just make sure you have a bolster close by. And a strap close by. And we're coming into some of these open heart shapes that we played with a little bit last week. So take a moment to ground through the legs and maybe invite the arms to come back into this cobra shape. And just taking a moment to use the muscles of the back to open up the heart, and not the muscles of the very low back, but the kind of muscles of the middle back. And this cobra really has a hood, right? So the neck doesn't need to be this thing that pops up. The neck might actually be one of the things that is the last to move. So notice if that sight line immediately jumps up, and notice if perhaps a little lower gaze allows for the opening to come from the sternum, from the heart. And after you've played with that active range of motion a little bit, then perhaps invite a supported cobra. So you can stay with that active range of motion if that's a compassionate way, if that's a joyful way for you to practice. And choosing the option that's most compassionate for you allows us to have altruistic joy for you in your practice. So just offering whatever version makes sense for you, and then inviting this bolster to kind of lift the heart with support. So I'm bringing it kind of beneath the sternum here. And then you can come into one of these shapes. This is you'll notice that I actually switched my bolsters out because this is a softer bolster. It doesn't like force the issue up. So maybe if you have different pillows and different blankets, you can kind of play with exactly how this can be supported. So that's one option of what you could play with. Another option is to perhaps be here in this active shape and maybe even float your hands, or maybe even play with that same kind of offering that we had in the standing shape. Maybe there's an interlace, or maybe holding your strap here. Or maybe it really feels nice to not have them connected. Maybe that's the most open and free and peaceful. Notice if your belly's really pushing into the floor, and see if you can find a balance between that outward effort and an inward effort, and notice what it allows in terms of some of the harmony in the breath, and in the posture. All right. So we'll play a little bit with bolster and strap options here. So just have them handy. Last time we talked a little bit about using the sandal option. That's a great option if you were here last week and played with that pose. That could be something that you decide you want to play with again today. But for now, I'll invite you to consider that bolster that is offering a little bit of support here in this kind of cobra shape. And then perhaps bringing just one leg back. So kind of thinking of that same, or bringing the leg forward, right? So the knee is flexing. That same kind of engagement that we had with the block. And then just noticing if we have an invitation to reach back with the hand or maybe the strap. So you can go with both legs if you feel like that invitation is there. Maybe finding a way to loop that strap around to feel a little bit of engagement. So you might want to roll to your side to get that strap around. You can have a couple different ways to see what is the most auspicious way for you to connect there. And even if you can connect with your hands, it might feel like that's kind of forcing the issue and less compassionate than maybe having a little bit more space with the straps. Take time to take a little break with that. And I'll show you one more version that we can play with. And this is moving the bolster from beneath the sternum to the pelvis. So your hip points will stay on this side of the center of the bolster. If your hip points end up on the other side, then there's a good tendency to fall forward on this. So I'll move it forward significantly. And then it's kind of the same options for the strap and the knee bend. And this is great, right? This is kind of a seal shape, an up dog shape, right? And that's fine. That's a really great, it might feel really great to be grounded through the tops of the feet and feel grounded in the fingertips or the palms or the hands, and open the heart with this bolster that allows to accommodate less of a contraction in the low back, right? If you do decide to try to play with the bow on the bolster, you'll know right away if you're too high up on the bolster, because you might end up here, and that's fun. But stability might be more fun as you play with perhaps a little bit of engagement and knowing where those edges are by, once again, scanning with a deep sense of compassion, a deep sense of care. Beautiful. Open hearts, and as you're ready, begin to map out how you'll start to transition out of this very engaged heart opening. Perhaps just taking a moment to extend prone, laying down, face down, chest down, and maybe inviting the breath into the backside of the body, noticing how the breath moves through the backside of the body. Perhaps inviting that four-part breath. Again, you have options. You can stay here enjoying that four-part breath. Or you can set up your bolster in a that inclined position that we often take, and invite a supported child's pose. So once again, the knees end up being a bit wide for this. And then noticing what kind of supports you might like for the supported child's pose to close off any gaps, maybe. Maybe the gaps feel fine, but maybe there's a gap in the belly, or maybe there's a gap for the head, and having a blanket at the top or maybe underneath helps to feel a little more grounded in this supported child's pose. You can always put your hands between the blocks, maybe. Everyone's levers are a little different, so maybe your hands reach the ground, maybe they don't. But if you have a block, it might feel nice. If a block's too high, then it might be lifting your shoulders up. And just take a moment to scan and settle. And allow this to be something that invites a little sense of surrender after a lot of fierce compassion that was invited into the spine, into the whole physical embodiness of open-hearted compassion. Maybe still inviting that curiosity of the 4-part breath and noticing how it moves through the back ribs. Maybe through that tissue beneath the ribs. Lower down. Beginning to invite a little sense of letting go. Beginning to invite that sense of peace. Maybe noticing the peace and stillness once again in that 4-part breath. If you've had your head turned to one side, maybe taking a moment to turn to the other side. And noticing how just turning the cervical spine, the head, has a reaction, a reverberation through the whole spine and the whole body. Maybe turning to one side isn't as auspicious as staying on one side. Noticing the inhale and the pause, and the exhale and the pause, and inviting a sense of peace and stillness. And after resting in this supported child's pose, just taking a moment before moving to consider how we might set up this final resting pose. Perhaps using these same blocks in a reclined position is something that you've done and you really like that, but maybe there's a complement in bringing the legs up the wall and
If you weren't here to see some of the legs up the wall last time, I'll just show you really quick. You'll invite this kind of side orientation towards the wall, and then perhaps invite yourself to come down with, I'm on my right shoulder, and then roll onto my back and bring the legs up. And that way there doesn't have to be too much scooching. Sometimes it might feel nice to have a little bit of weight that feels grounding on the feet. I'm just taking a moment to notice how that orientation plays out for your final resting pose. Perhaps it will feel better to lay supine with a bolster underneath the knees. Maybe gathering a blanket if it will feel nice to be covered for this extended period of time in stillness. Wherever you are, just taking this moment to allow yourself to settle in, knowing that if at any point you feel like you want to change your shape, you can. Just do so mindfully. Begin to invite this sense of letting go, sense of surrender, as you ground into stillness. Notice this transition from doing to simply being. Take a moment to just offer yourself a sense of ease. And as you offer yourself this sense of ease, we can just notice as a collective an opportunity to celebrate this altruistic joy of this offering of ease that we are all embracing. As you begin to let your body settle, consider closing your eyes if you haven't done so already, or just softening the gaze. No need to force yourself into stillness. Just allow that stillness to arrive. Allow your body to arrive in this moment and invite it, continue to invite it to ground. Continue to notice and sense this shift from movement to stillness. Notice this shift from effort to ease. And let your breath guide you. Noticing the inhale and the pause and the exhale and the pause. Inviting a sense of curious compassion. And noticing how your body relates to each breath. And if your mind wanders away, that's okay, that's normal. Just simply invite it back. Invite it to return with loving kindness. Now I invite you to bring to mind an image of yourself in the past or in the present. And as you breathe gently, recite inwardly the following phrases directed towards your own well-being. You begin with yourself because without loving yourself, it's difficult to share love with others. So breathe gently and say silently, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I be safe. May I be well in body and mind. May I be at ease and have peace. And now bring to mind someone you love, someone who has loved you, someone who you have a lot of affection for, or someone for whom you care very deeply. This could be a friend, relative, partner, pet, mentor, anyone past or present who has offered you a sense of belonging, a sense of care. Breathe gently and say silently, may they be filled with loving kindness. May they be safe from harm. May they be well in body and mind. May they be at peace and have ease. And now expand your awareness to include all the living beings in the world. And breathe gently and say silently, may everyone be filled with loving kindness. May everyone be safe from harm. May everyone be well in body and mind. May everyone be at peace and have ease. And now see if you can allow these words to settle into your experience as we all rest together as a collective for the last 3 minutes in silence. Begin to notice your breath again. Gently begin to invite movement back into your body. Begin to invite whatever it is you need in this moment, whether that be continued stillness, stretching, wiggles, fidgets, or maybe just simply bringing your hand to your heart. Begin to think about your transition to a seat, and when you're ready, in the next 20 seconds, take as much time as you need to make your way to a comfortable seated position. Once you make your way to your seated position, just take a moment to ground once again, stabilize, perhaps invite a little bit of expansion. Consider a position for your hands, maybe closing your eyes. If it feels comfortable to do so, perhaps bringing your hands to heart center, maybe bowing your head if that feels inviting. Perhaps taking a moment to bring your awareness back to the intention you set at the beginning of class, or just taking a moment to notice anything that has come up in this practice as we invite the Brahma Viharas, this sense of equanimity, loving kindness, compassion, and altruistic joy into our practice, and also off the mat and into the way that we walk through life. Perhaps with an inhale, breathing it in, with an exhale, sending it out. I invite you to lower your hands and perhaps open your eyes if they were closed. And thank you all for sharing your practice this morning. It's a joy and a privilege to share this time with you. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I look forward to seeing you next week. All right. Well, 200 hours, you have a